Welcome to the Return on Lifestyle podcast with Rey Descalso from Pravada Wealth Management. In this podcast, we help you overcome financial worries and make sense of planning, investing, insurance, and banking. Join us for this journey as Rey draws from his expertise and interviews brilliant minds to help you enjoy life. The best is yet to come.
Good day to you and welcome to the Return on Lifestyle podcast. I am your host, Rey Descalso. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about preparing for the zombie apocalypse. Now, I know that sounds silly, but it's actually an entry on the CDC website. The Center for Disease Controls came up with this nifty idea of talking about preparing for a zombie apocalypse, but also too a zombie pandemic, obviously theming it with what we're going through right now. This is October of 2020, so we are, who knows where we are exactly in the whole pandemic thing. But the CDC decided that they would kind of follow the trend. You know, about 10 years ago or so, zombies became a new thing, maybe 15 years ago now, really. The Walking Dead on TV, a resurgence in zombie movies. Perhaps that was just in the zeitgeist, and so the CDC said, let's go ahead and run with that. And of course, if you go to the CDC website, at least when I first looked at it about a week ago, in early October, the link was broken that morning to actually download all of their information, which I thought was great because, you know, the government doesn't really have a profit motive. In fact, you are their profit. And so, if the link's broke, go to the other CDC, you know, the competition. Anyways, with the COVID-19 pandemic, zombie movies seem a little bit less like science fiction. In fact, probably some zombie movies would be preferable to what you're going through. In October of 2020, as I'm talking about this, you know, we're really at a turning point where folks are looking at what's going on and they're wondering what's next. But I want you to go back because if you think about it, this was really kind of serious. We didn't know where we were. I think you may have forgotten that in March, the shelves were bare, especially in the paper towels and toilet paper, which was kind of weird. And then, of course, meat was getting scarce. Restaurants were closed. Bottled water was hard to find. There were fights in the supermarket. Lysol, I think Lysol and disinfectant 409 and, you know, fantastic cleaners, those just came back in my store probably about a month ago to where you could actually find it. You know, living in Central Florida, where I am based here in Maitland, Florida, we're kind of used to the idea of hurricanes, and so we're used to hurricane preparedness. But the pandemic of 2020, the COVID-19 situation that we find ourselves in, the lockdowns, the shutdowns, the masks and all that, social distancing, has really thrown us for a loop. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how do you prepare for the next pandemic, the next hurricane, or the next zombie apocalypse. And believe it or not, that's actually got to be one of the first conversations that you have when it comes to retirement planning. Now, I know you're thinking, okay, how in the world does that work? Well, first of all, when it comes to disaster planning, whether it is, whatever the nature may be, the number one thing you need to have is you have to have stuff and things, okay? So there's a couple different ways of looking at disasters. You've got your hurricane-style disaster where it comes in strong, if it comes in at all, you don't know for sure, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you're without power, you're without clean water, and you're without food. Typically here in Central Florida, we're lucky because we either evacuate or the power comes on in a week. And there's civilization restored in a short period of time. Now, there could be catastrophic losses. You may have to live with relatives or live in a hotel room, but you will find yourself back on your feet shortly. So what do you have in that case? Well, what you have is potable water, batteries, tarps, the basic things. I'm not going to bore you with that, but stocking up on stuff makes a lot of sense. Tarps, weather radio, full tank of gas, things that will store for a year, you know, beans and rice, non-perishable foodstuffs. I still have Vienna sausages from 2005 when Charlie came through. So, you know, they're like fine wine. They just age over time. So, and then of course you need to finally consider how to best protect your family in a situation where there will be no power, there will be no ATM machines and that type of thing. And then the final thing I would say, or the next thing I would say, and the most important thing when it comes to disaster planning and pandemic planning and retirement planning is to have a conversation with yourself and your financial planner about cash. Because stuff and things are great, but you can only store so much Vienna sausages, so many tarps, and so much gas in your generator. At some point, you're going to need to go out to the marketplace, and you're going to have to barter or exchange for goods and services. And that's why I want to talk now about cash. But it's not just for the next hurricane or the next pandemic, but also for retirement. You see, in the 3 pillars of stability planning, and we're going to come back to stability planning, you'll recall that the first pillar is the liquid pillar, right? So you've got the liquid pillar, the income pillar, and the growth pillar. The liquid pillar is really where we are talking about money in the bank. Now, there's nothing sexy about money in the bank. In today's low interest rate environments, it's almost like you are paying them to store your money. By the time you pay your gas bill to get there, to go to the ATM machine and come home again, you've actually gone backwards when you account for inflation and the fact that there's very little interest being paid for you at the bank. So in the next few months, it's one of those kind of things where we have to take a look at how is cash really serving you? Well, in the next 10 years, cash is trash, to quote Ray Dalio. Cash is trash for a 10-year situation. But the next 6 months, cash is worth its weight in gold. Yeah, I chose that phrase on purpose because the irony of it is there's a difference between cash and gold. So here's why that cash is so important. Well, obviously, we look at it and you can see that in this pandemic situation, we have really been served well by having a nice stack of cash in the bank. Why? Because many of the people listening to this podcast were furloughed. We're not too far from Disney World. My house is even closer than my office to Disney World. And I think they're releasing 28,000 people today from the theme parks because there's just no one going to the theme parks right now thanks to the pandemic. Those people may or may not have been able to survive financially this long period of time, 6 months for some of them, without a regular income. I've got some clients who work at Disney World, and speaking with them, things have been tough. They've been working from home, those who still have jobs. But the point of this is that wealth is measured in several different ways. The number one metric to me for wealth is peace of mind. What we tend to do is we tend to look at our finances in terms of numbers and rates of return and those type of things. But at the end of the day, your 3 pillars in retirement planning, your liquid pillar, your income pillar, and your growth pillar, are about feeling comfortable and feeling good. And so, again, that number inside your liquid pillar, we call it your sleep at night number. We call it your peace of mind number. Think about it for a second. I've met clients who feel a great need for putting their money into real estate. It gives them peace of mind to invest in something that they can see and feel and control themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. And I know others who squirrel away gold and silver, physical gold and silver in a sock in their closet because they feel like, hey, it's a hedge against inflation and no one can take it away from me. I'm in control of my finances. And there's a place for that as well. I'm not knocking it. However, no asset class is quite like cash. You can't spend your rental property on your primary residence for a loaf of bread. So you put yourself into a 6 months pandemic situation or a 6-day hurricane situation, and you'll see that your real estate is really less of an asset and more of a liability, and perhaps even maybe your gold and silver. I mean, if you've got an ounce of silver, a coin, and you want a loaf of bread, well, I don't know what the going rate right this very second is, but let's say it's $30 for an ounce of silver. You've got to spend $30 unless you can shave off exactly $1.50, whatever the price of that loaf of bread is. And of course, it's even worse with gold, an ounce of gold, $2,000+. So you see that real estate and gold and all these other different types of things, they are great and they have a place, but they don't have a place in that liquid pillar. They don't really have a place when it comes to disaster planning or pandemic planning or emergency planning. And so what we say is that your liquid pillar, the money that you have there in that pillar, that is your sleep at night number. And typically speaking, when it comes to young families, people who are accruing money and trying to get their wealth going where it needs to go, we believe that 3 to 6 months of of living expenses in a savings account, FDIC insured in the bank, makes the most sense. In retirement, it would be a good idea to have 6 to 12 months. And again, it's your sleep at night number. And so some of my clients will say, you know what, Ray, I want more cash, because whereas some people want real estate and some people want gold and some people want whatever, I want to have a lot of cash in the bank. And we have that conversation because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the cash is going backwards and having too much is a bad thing. Gold and silver have always been an intrinsic store of value, but the reality of it is what happens when you actually have to spend that money. Having that sleep at night number, you feel better about yourself. I remember when I was 1997, I called Dave Ramsey's show, and I don't remember if his book was out. I believe the book was Financial Peace at that time, and his steps were not called baby steps, they were called peace puppies. I'm not kidding, that's what he called them. But even back then, to his credit, he said you gotta have 3 to 6 months in savings. And I remember as a young college student about to get married, thinking to myself, 3 months of cash? I mean, you live paycheck to paycheck as you're building your wealth at that young of an age. But he believed it, he preached it, and he has ever since. And individually, I think people have benefited from that over time, where you'll see that some people have really experienced a blessing in their life to know that they've got 3 to 6 months if they're unemployed or something bad should happen, or an emergency happens. Obviously, that's what that money's there for. But even more so in a pandemic, I think more people have seen the light and said, yeah, we've got to have major amounts of cash in our bank account, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation like we just did, especially if you're working for a living, especially if cash flow is part of the deal, because in a pandemic, in a hurricane, in a situation where you have health issues, cash is the only thing that's going to be able to bridge that gap between income, okay? And so when you're in retirement, in fact, it's kind of interesting, many of my retirees who are collecting Social Security, collecting a pension, collecting income from their portfolio, other than market volatility, this has been a relatively easy time for them. They weren't going out that much as they were. Maybe they had to cancel a trip to Italy or a trip to England or whatever the case may be. But that's about the worst of it for them. They were able to make it through. Obviously, they're in a higher class for getting sick, so they took a little bit more serious. But the key is that cash is king, and you need to have that conversation of how much cash do you have. And here's why that's important, because so many of us, especially when we are saving for retirement, look at our peace of mind when it comes to the pillars, right? If you're putting money away for the long term, you are really focused on the growth pillar of life. And so you're putting money into your 401k, you're putting money into your 403b, you're putting money into real estate, you're piling up your money. I want to challenge you to have a conversation about liquidity and about disaster planning and about income stopping, unemployment, disability, pandemics, hurricanes, because the peace of mind that you feel, the good feelings that you feel by having all that money in your IRA can also come back to bite you if you haven't had that conversation, thought about, well, how much do we have in our liquid pillar? How much do we have in cash? Because cash is a good thing. It's a good thing to have, and I don't know when the next pandemic is going to happen. I don't know when you're going to be out of work. I don't know when health issues are going to come up. But consider stashing some of that money away and saving for that rainy day as part of a big plan, as having a plan for your liquid pillar, for your growth pillar, and for your income pillar. Because only with a plan like that can you truly have stability planning kind of peace of mind. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Return on Lifestyle podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Privada Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider for any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The following program is sponsored by Privada Wealth Management, which is solely responsible for its content. Advisory services offered through J.W. Cole Advisors Incorporated. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial Incorporated. Member IFNRA, SIPC. Privada Wealth Management is an unaffiliated entity from J.W. Cole Advisors and J.W. Cole Financial. The opinions expressed by Rey Descalso should not be construed as specific investment, legal, or tax advice. All economic and performance information is historical and not indicative of future results. Investing may involve the risk of loss of principal. Any tax advice on this show is not intended to be used by any person for the purpose of avoiding U.S. federal or state tax penalties that may be imposed on such person, and each listener should seek advice from their tax advisor or legal counsel on topics that arise from the show. Nothing should be construed as solicitation of an offer to buy securities. The preceding program is sponsored by Privada Wealth Management, which is solely responsible for its content.